My guest made a deal with God. He said, get me out of jail and I'll serve you. Well, we're going to find out if Paul Miles, in fact, kept his side of the bargain. Paul, welcome to 100 Huntley Street.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Okay, before we answer that question, let's talk about your growing up years. You got into a bit of trouble. You were a bit of a rebellious guy. What was going on?
Yeah, I was quite rebellious. I wish I could answer the question why I was rebellious, but the people I hung out with the same way. And I was a very good athlete, but always on the other side, it seemed like, in some of the things that I did at night and the activities that I was doing. And got into drugs very early in grade 9, and it kind of all went downhill a bit from that point.
So how was things going at school? Because you got kicked out and then you're going back in, and I mean, it was a very tumultuous time.
Yeah, well, I got kicked out for lack of being there. They take your attendance, and then of course I was failing anyways. Like I think my final algebra exam was 9%, so that you're not doing too well.
No, you're struggling.
And you're really struggling in school, and your friends are all with you, and you hang out in the parking lot, and you do drugs and that kind of a thing. You had no interest in school whatsoever, right? Really. Athletics I liked, but not school.
So you mentioned your dad was a policeman. He was a head detective in Regina, and you got arrested from one of his colleagues. What happened when word got back to your dad that his son had been arrested?
Well, it got back pretty quick because my dad headed up the CID Criminal Investigation Division in Regina for young offenders, which I was a young offender. So when I was arrested at the B&E that my friend and I were on, I got taken to the police station, and then my dad, they put me in a little room they take your stuff away from you and put you in an interview room, and he come in there, and I thought, oh no, he's gonna beat the stuffing out of me.
Mm-hmm.
And he had he was on duty actually, and he had a long trench coat on and a hat, and he took it all off and he stuck it on the table and he put his hat down and sat across from me. And I thought, oh, I didn't know what to think. And then he says, it's my fault that you're here.
Wow. Was he aware up to that point that you were getting into trouble?
Yeah, he was approached by fellow officers about some of our activities, and he would talk to us, and we would always have an excuse that they were wrong. And of course, when you're a policeman's son and the other policemen, they don't look kindly upon that kind of thing. So they don't like you. Some of them just don't like you that much when you're that way. So when he was sitting across from me at the table, he said, the milk is spilt now. Let's start all over again. Stood up, grabbed his top coat, his hat, turned around and walked out of the room and left me sitting there.
You weren't expecting that. You were maybe expecting he was going to get angry, but so he takes some responsibility. What did that do to you?
It shocked me. You see, my dad was a public speaker. He spoke at home school meetings about delinquent teenagers. And of course, now his son was one. So he was in the public eye, so it would have been really hard on him. And it shocked me when I went back to jail on remand. I just didn't know how to handle it. Like, he came to visit me when I was in jail, and nobody else did for my family, but he gave me a little New Testament. So when I was in jail, I said to God, I'll serve you if you get me out of here.
Yeah, that's how we started here. Okay, so we're at that point now then, Paul. So you're in jail. God, if you get me out of here, yeah, I'll serve you. I think that's probably been prayed a few times, but you maybe didn't live up to that bargain?
No, I got out of jail and forgot that and went down the same road that I was on. I hadn't talked to my father for years because they moved away to get their marriage back on track, which they did do.
And that was after he had this real conversion, not just Christianity or church as a religion, but he had a transformation in his life.
Yeah, it was a total transformation because he changed at that point. And I just didn't believe that he had changed. And you're going to watch and see, and of course, living in a different city, it's hard to, but I had a praying mother, like a prayer warrior, all those years. And many people prayed for us. So I think it was the prayers of people that brought us to a point where we had to do a change too. So I would encourage anybody to pray for your kids or your loved ones.
So your dad has this transformation. He had eventually become a pastor, but your life was still kind of spiraling out of control. Tell me about, so you're in your late 20s, you're flying back from Montreal, you had some success in your life in the business world, you're flying to Calgary. What happened, Paul?
Well, I had success in the business world. in those years I was in the power transmission industry. I traveled across Western Canada. And of course, when you have money, you have access to more drugs
Yep.
and more good times and more people. And in Montreal, I remember it specifically, I was laying in a bed and I was looking up at the ceiling thinking, now, why don't I have any peace? And that was the first honest prayer that I had was, I said, Jesus, help me come down. And I came down, and then of course I was flying back to Regina on the plane, and I was sitting there and I was all alone. And I was just thinking,
I mean, after all these years, it still touches your heart.
well, yeah, it was, I'd been to seances, and I just didn't believe that Jesus could save me. So
You think what? Do you think you were just too far gone?
thought I was too far gone. I'd seen some pretty strange things in seances and stuff. And I thought the devil was powerful, and I was confused. I couldn't figure out. And then a little voice in my mind said, all you have to do is ask. So I kind of went, oh, and I said, And so then I asked Jesus to come into my life and forgive me.
And he did.
It was like a wave that went from the tip of my head slowly down to my toes. And I felt weightless in the seat. And why that was is because the crud on in your life,
Yeah.
all of a sudden is lifted. And, I felt so good about things. I was an alcoholic, and Jesus took alcoholism from me like that. And the reason I know that is I went back to the bar, and I didn't know where else to go. I was still with my friends, and then they'd say, hey, Miles, do you want a drink? And I'd say, no, I don't want a drink. And then they'd say, well, why? And I'd tell them, well, I was on an airplane, and I met Jesus, and they'd ask me my story, and then I would tell them. And then I realized I was the only sober, straight guy in there. And so I just kept going to the bar because I didn't have any Christian friends. And then over time, I thought, well, maybe I should find a church, and then found a church, to go to, walked in the back door of the church and started going to a church and learning more about Jesus. And then I just started devouring my Bible. And I'd tried to destroy a Bible before that my mother had sent to me.
Wow.
And she would send Bibles to me, and I would throw them in a corner somewhere in a box. I never read any of them, right? And then I couldn't get enough of the Bible.
And he's done amazing things in your life. I mean, you're married now, you had the gift of an adopted child. And tell me something that is very important to you and your wife. It's Father's Heart Project. It's about sponsoring children and also sponsoring schools. Tell me about that, Paul.
I was having my devotions by myself, and I was reading in James, true religion is to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And obviously there's quite a bit of distress, as you know, going on. And so without really starting with, no plan, we started at that point with Father's Heart Projects and hired a local fellow there. And we worked with a national. We worked with nationals. And that's how we started, was we didn't have any money. We didn't know what we were doing. And we just went ahead in faith that this thing would work out somehow. And that was 14 years ago. And as we built our first small school, and the pastor we're working with planted his church on there, and that grew, and today it's over 2,000 people. And,
Wow.
and then we had to move because we gave him that property, and then we went out of town and we built a school for up to 500 kids, still working with the same national person.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for sharing your story. So when we started out, we said, you made this deal with God. If you get me out of jail, I'll serve you. There was just a little bit of lag time.
Yes.
And that's the encouraging part. So thank you for sharing your story. And as you're watching today, maybe you've made that deal with God. Get me out of trouble, whatever your situation is, and maybe you didn't follow through. He totally understands it. He's a God of love. He's a God of mercy. And if you just want to talk to somebody about that, or maybe you've dealt with some of the issues that Paul has dealt with, with addiction, drugs and alcohol, anger, broken relationships in families, and God can restore these things. And if you want to talk to somebody, give us a call. We got amazing prayer partners standing by 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Give us a call, 1-866-273-4444.